Here's what's coming up in episode 175, Halloween with Lisa Morton. Do you have any of Dennison's Bogie books?
I do.
I'm jealous.
I have a couple. After 9/11, people predicted that would be the end of Halloween, and instead it came back stronger than ever from that. So it will survive this. One of my favorite misconceptions is this idea that it stems from this ancient Celtic lord of death.
I even remember getting a flyer when I was in elementary school talking about how the hospital was volunteering to x-ray your candy so you could safely dig into your candy.
There was one in which you were supposed to go down a staircase backwards, looking into a mirror. And the idea was that at the bottom of the staircase, if you were looking into the mirror, you would see the face of the person you were going to end up marrying.
Not creepy at all.
Welcome to the Big Seance Podcast. I'm Patrick Keller of BigSeance.com, and this is a place for an open discussion on all things paranormal, but specifically topics like ghosts and hauntings, paranormal research, spirit communication, psychics and mediums, and life after death. So basically, anything that pops up in my paranormal world. The candles are already lit, so you might as well come on in and join the seance.
Well, hello again. I hope you're enjoying a spooky October. And if not, we're going to work on that today because it's the last Halloween episode before Halloween. And it's a very special episode because we have two pieces of listener feedback today. And that almost never happens. You may remember this first listener. She used to call in a few times every Halloween season, and she's even been my house guest for a while. She does grace Joe and I with her presence every 31st of October to help scare the kitties. Now, I have to remind you, she is a witch. No, really. Her name is Meth Hazel, and she now lives way out in the woods behind the house. Let's see what she has for us today.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'll FaceTime you tomorrow, Karen. Yeah, you better get back inside and take care of those herbs of yours. Yeah, I gotta leave a speaker pipe for Patrick. Yeah, his hotline makes it sound like crap. Hello, Patrick. Hello, listeners of the Big Seance Podcast. Yes, it's your old friend, Meth Hazel, and I'm here to wish you all a very happy Walpurgis night. You know, I was just... Wait, did I just say Walpurgis night? I meant Halloween. Yeah, happy Halloween. Honestly, ever since this quarantine started, I have no sense of what day it is. Seriously, I don't know if I should cast spells to help someone's crops for the spring, make someone's bull infertile for the summer. I do remember I made sure this autumn's grape harvest will be especially bountiful because, baby, I'm gonna need some of that wine, am I right? Well, you know what they say. It's the new paranormal. In a way, I'm glad I live deep in the grim walking wood, socially distant, you know. Granted, I did turn a couple of frogs into a pair of very charming princes. I call one Chad and the other Brad. I thought about adding a Tad, but that would make Chad sad and Brad mad. And I do get the occasional visitor. The other day, 2 lost children knocked at my door. I opened the door a crack and saw that they weren't wearing masks. Know what I did? I gave them directions to get back home. What is happening with me? I tell ya, it's a good thing my therapist has started doing Zoom sessions, or I'd be a wreck. And what's the big deal about not wearing face masks anyway? I have a neighbor who lives down under the bridge. He's a troll. He refuses to wear a mask. So I told him, Trevor, wear a mask. It might help your dating life. He just sneered at me. Okay, yeah, that was insensitive of me, but I could see I wasn't getting anywhere. So I did it. Yes, I did. I cast a spell on him. Hey, magic is what I do. But in my defense, I made his face mask smell like lavender. Funny thing is, now Trevor sleeps like all the time. I'm guessing maybe he has one of those lavender-scented sleep masks. Weird. Hey, speaking of weird, who are you, Patrick? Do you have big Halloween plans? Myself, I'm planning to make like a demon and stay right here at home. Do you know about that? Demons, yeah, they stay in on Halloween. Yeah, they think it's all too tacky, all too crass. I forget where I heard that, but it's a whole thing. So that's where I'll be on Halloween, sitting at home, conjure up some popcorn and summon the power of Netflix. Doesn't sound too bad, does it? Well, however you celebrate it, have a great and safe Halloween, people. And don't let the vampires bite. No, serious. You might be asymptomatic, and that could be bad for the vampire. So just don't. Okay, I'll talk to y'all next year. And sweet Hecate, let's hope it's a better one.
Well, thank you, Meth Hazel. And I want to make a special shout out to our friend, Tim Prasil, who told Meth Hazel what to say. He's great at that kind of thing, isn't he? If you don't remember Tim Prasil, then you need to visit some of our old episodes where Tim had a regular feature on the show, the Spectral Edition. You can find more about Tim, his books, including the book Spectral Edition, by going to brombonesbooks.com, and I'll have that link in the show notes. You can also find him hanging out in the Big Seance Parlor on Facebook on occasion. Thank you for the help and creativity, Tim. Well, here's another familiar voice.
Well, hello. This is Leslie from the Living Dead Girls podcast, and Miss Cat 13 and I would both like to wish Patrick a very happy Halloween. He is our favorite Paranerd, and it is because of him that we have our own title for our listeners. We call them Murder Paranerdos, and that phrase is born out of our good friend Patrick. But more than anything else, I just wanted to say Halloween wouldn't be the same without the Big Seance podcast. I've been listening to it, every October, the Halloween episodes, and Patrick's enthusiasm kicks up my enthusiasm for the holiday, and we are very grateful for him. He has helped us become what we are as far as helping us with techie things and podcast things that other people would run screaming from. Patrick has always answered the call to help us, and we just think he's the greatest, and I love his show. And I hope that everybody else who listens appreciates him as much as we do. And we hope to someday maybe hang out in the Parlor, although I know the secret about the Parlor. So maybe we'll just hang out on my couch in the Red Room recording studio. Anyways, again, happy Halloween, blessed Samhain, be good to each other, stay safe, and happy Halloween, everybody.
Thank you, Leslie and Kat. If you like true crime and the paranormal both, you might like the Living Dead Girls podcast, and I'll have the link to their show in the show notes as well. And now it's time for the main event. Lisa Morton, who was just here 5 episodes ago with her book Calling the Spirits, returns because she is also a well-known Halloween expert. So before we pour the tea, I want to point out that this was recorded a few months ago, and so all the upcoming books she will mention later are available right now. Lisa Morton is a screenwriter, author of nonfiction books, and award-winning prose writer whose work was described by the American Library Association's Reader's Advisory Guide to Horror as consistently dark, unsettling, and frightening. She is the author of 4 novels and 150 short stories, a 6-time winner of the Bram Stoker Award, and a world-class Halloween expert, which is what we're going to talk about today. She co-edited with Leslie S. Klinger the anthology Ghost Stories, Classic Tales of Horror and Suspense. Recently, she released a delicious book called Calling the Spirits, A History of Seances, which we talked about in her last appearance here on The Big Seance in episode 170. Lisa lives in Los Angeles, and her website is lisamorton.com. Welcome back, Lisa.
Hey, it's great to be back, Patrick.
When we talked last, I asked if you, because I knew you were a Halloween expert and I'd read some of your work on that topic, and I said, will you please come back and nerd out with us for Halloween, because it's been such a long time since we've just really dived in to some Halloween stuff.
And of course, I said, I can't nerd out to Halloween. What are you? Obviously, I can.
And as I alluded to in the last time you were with me, you have a wall behind you in your home with lots of Halloween art. Do you want to talk about that? I mean, and describe it to people. People can't see, but they can imagine.
Yeah, when we moved into this house 5 years ago, and I had never, before that, I had lived in small apartments for almost my entire life, and I'd always wanted a home office. So we took one of the bedrooms, and I got my lifelong dream of a home office at last, and I kept one wall just for Halloween art, because I do love the look and the iconography and the images of the holiday as well. And it's kind of a mix of prints and original pieces. One of my prize possessions on that wall is an original drawing by Gris Grimley that was used in the edition of Ray Bradbury's Halloween tree that he illustrated. It's actually the little one that right there is the original Gris Grimley piece, and just a lot of things that I just really love.
I held back for a while on putting Halloween things out all year round because I was really worried that it would ruin it. It would ruin the magic for me. I have so many memories of childhood. The night that my parents would allow me to go downstairs and get the box of Halloween decorations and start putting them around. And that moment of decorating was always so special. And it was like, I don't want to ruin it. But I did finally give up several years ago, and I have some Halloween things here and there on the walls. Do you ever have a problem with that, or are you cool with being Halloween all the time?
No problem whatsoever. I have my stuff like this in my office, but we still do a ton of decorating just for the holiday. So yeah. To me, it's the best of both worlds that way.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about how Halloween became such an influence on you to become the Halloween expert and nerd that you are today? How'd that happen?
It's so funny because some of it actually was just by accident. I mean, obviously, I loved the holiday growing up. One of the things I loved about it was that it was my entire family got into putting together my costumes and decorating the house, and they would dress up, and it was like the night of the year that my mom decided to be scary, and she loved jumping out at kids and all that, which is funny because she normally was totally Holly Homemaker. And so it was really fun to see that. But people think that I had this like lifelong goal of becoming a Halloween expert, and that wasn't the case at all. Back in the late 90s, when I was working at this used bookstore, we would occasionally get these interesting little vintage like decorating pamphlets through. They did a lot of those in the 1920s and 30s for the holiday, and I thought they were cute, and I would take them home and so forth, and I started to build a little collection of those. But then in the early 2000s, I had just finished a film book with this publisher, McFarland and Company. And they said to me, would you like to do another book with us? And so I looked at some other things that they had recently published, and they had just brought out the Christmas Encyclopedia. And I looked at that and I thought, well, I've got these little vintage Halloween books I've been collecting for a while just for fun, and maybe I could do a Halloween encyclopedia. So I proposed that to them, and they immediately said yes. And I still have no idea why I thought that was going to be easy. It's crazy that I thought, oh, this will just be a few months of work that I can do with these little. Obviously, it was not. It was years of work. And in the process of researching that book, I gathered so much material that it was easy then to roll it over into other books. And it just became a real passion at that point. I think it almost is inevitable that if you're going to write a 90,000 word encyclopedia, you're going to become pretty passionate about that subject.
Or you're going to crash pretty quick.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Do you have any of Dennison's Bogie books?
I do.
I'm jealous.
I have a couple, and one that I got not even all that long ago that showed up at the bookstore was not only an original Dennison's Bogie book, but it was in the original envelope, which I didn't even know they came in their own custom envelopes. So that obviously came home with me. And I have a number of the reprints, but I think I have 3 of the originals.
Wow, that's one of the things that I decorate my Halloween altar with in general around the house on Halloween. I've printed pages out of Dennison's Bogie books, you know, the entertaining and the costumes and the party scenes. And I think it's cool history. And so I printed those on cardstock and I kind of placed those. It's like that would inspire a conversation, I think, if someone just ran up on those and it was like, man, what are these? And then you can just talk about it.
Oh, yeah, they're glorious. And I love the idea that you made decorations by blowing up the pages out of them, because the pages are just absolutely beautiful. The art and so forth in them is still stunning and is still some of the best examples of vintage Halloween art.
And really, they were just like a catalog, right? So people every year could plan their entertaining. And I mean, you could buy things out of them, right?
Right. Yeah, Dennison's was a company that manufactured paper goods. And so they started putting out these little yearly books called the Bogie Books that's exactly what they were. They were just catalogs of the things that they were selling that year to decorate for Halloween and how you could use them. And what's funny is you look at them now and some of it's like, really? They did that? I'm sure you know things like making costumes out of crepe paper, which seems crazy to me. I don't even know how you could do that, but it was a very popular thing, I guess.
That reminds me of, you know, in the 80s and some of the 90s when all the Halloween costumes for kids were plastic.
Oh, yeah.
I guess
plastic
that's a similar
and,
thing.
Nylon or something, yeah.
So what are some of your favorite Halloween traditions? You have to have gained a few over the years.
We love yard haunts. That's like my favorite part in many ways of the modern Halloween. I just love yard haunts. I love the fact that homeowners turn into like little amusement park designers on a miniature scale. And since I live in LA, we have some extraordinary yard haunts here because many of these people actually work for the film or amusement park businesses. And so we have some really amazing ones. We had a legendary one here that ran for 30 years and unfortunately has been gone for about 10 years now, called the Hollowed Haunting Grounds. And this was a house over in Studio City. And these people did work in the film business. And they had essentially recreated much of the Disneyland Haunted Mansion in their front yard.
Wow.
And it was phenomenal. And people would line up for hours to walk in and you didn't walk into their house, but they actually had created a little extensive pathway up one driveway and through their yard and so forth. And you would stop and look in one window of the house, and they would have the translucent ghost organist in there, and then they would have the head of the medium floating in the ball, and they did it really well. We have one now that's up in Woodland Hills called House on Haunted Hill, and they actually put on an astonishing 3-act play, which starts at one side of the house and then moves past the house, and then you walk finally to their side yard. And it's this whole extravagant thing with its own score and amazing effects and so forth about this silent film actress who got shafted by her husband and comes back from the grave to haunt him and seek revenge. And it's astonishing. And they actually have reached the point where they have to get permits from the city to block off their entire neighborhood because so many people come to see them every year. So obviously not everybody in LA is on that scale of haunts, but we have a couple of groups here that people put down their address, and you can go from house to house every year using these little lists of who's putting these things on. And we love all of them. We love seeing the ones that are very small as well as these mega things. And we started doing one when we came to our house about 5 years ago. So the only bummer part of that is we don't get to check out all the other ones now. But we love doing our own. We don't do a people in mask who jump out at you thing. We love the mood stuff. So we do a lot of stuff with projections. And my significant other has been building our first full-size coffin recently. He retired in March, so he's been going nuts on putting stuff together for our display this year. And we'll see who even is out there visiting these things this year. You know, it's going to be really strange, but we just love doing it for ourselves.
I imagine in neighborhoods around there, the months leading up to Halloween just look like a giant Hollywood set with construction going on.
Some of it, yeah, I'm sure.
And the planning it takes, probably all year long, some of them.
Some of them absolutely are all year long. There was one that was a few years ago over in Burbank, and they actually built an entire 2-story front to a fake house that they put up in front of their own house. And then they had rain effects. So you actually would walk by this haunted fake front of this house and you'd get rained on. And that stuff was mind blowing to me. I'm astonished at both the effort and the time that goes into that. It's I don't know who has that kind of time, but God bless them.
Other than the home haunts, I think we hear a lot about Halloween, in the Midwest and the East Coast. What are some of the other major differences in Halloween on the West Coast? The first thing that always sticks out in my mind is the weather. I can't imagine Halloween not having crispy autumn leaves rolling around and the cooler weather usually. And just what's Halloween like on the West Coast? Have you always lived on the West Coast?
I have. I'm a lifelong native. I was born and raised here and have lived mostly in LA despite a few years when I was a teenager in San Diego. It's funny, talking about missing the leaves and the weather and so forth. I remember Tim Burton once being quoted as saying that he loved seeing Halloween items come into the stores because that was our version of seeing the leaves and so forth. The weather is very different. But what's funny is I think in some ways Halloween has become more about tiny pockets of space rather than these big regions, which used to be the case. It used to be fairly just distinct in terms of the big regions. Now it seems like I hear this from all over the country that within pretty much every city, there will be the pockets that are really strongly still celebrating and going nuts with trick or treat. And then a mile away, there will be the whole neighborhood where they get no kids at all. And that's very much the case here in LA. In my neighborhood, I am the only person who decorates for Halloween. Fortunately, we have a few families who have figured out we're here, and they come every year and they bring their kids, and they love to pose the kids in our graveyard that we set up in our driveway. And it's delightful. We love doing it. But We have a couple of neighborhoods here in LA that everybody goes to. They're Toluca Lake, which is a sort of affluent part of the valley, is where people drive from all over LA now to go trick-or-treating there. And you cannot get within 3 miles of Toluca Lake on Halloween night. So yeah, it's become a really strange thing with just these odd little pockets.
Now, I guess there's kind of an elephant in the room, and we have to say that as we record this, it's August 2nd. So if the future has changed, we don't know about it. But I asked you in the last appearance on the show if you thought that if the pandemic would have lasting effects on what Halloween looks like for us. And you stated that you didn't think it would be affected too much. And I hope that's true. I hope that there's not, I mean, I think it's going to be a bummer for a lot of people because as we discussed last time, this is like a mega Halloween because of a full moon and it being on the weekend and all those things. And people are let down by that. But, you know, hopefully we can, how are people going to make this year magical? Do you have some tips on how to make Halloween this year just spectacular?
I don't know. I think it obviously is going to be a really strange year this year for Halloween. I think the holiday will bounce back very nicely after this. People were after 9/11, people predicted that would be the end of Halloween. And instead it came back stronger than ever from that. So it will survive this. This year is going to be really interesting. I was just saying to somebody the other day that wouldn't it be interesting if one of the things that came out of this year was an increase in virtual haunted attractions, which I think would be really cool. I mean, because of my schedule every October, I never get to go to any of the big haunted attractions, the big professional ones, because I can't afford to give away an entire night to standing in line and then going through these things. I would be happy to pay to go through them on a virtual basis at my own schedule. I think that would be really interesting. I have truthfully not heard of anyone's doing anything like that. It seems like most of them are just shutting down this year.
That is such an interesting idea that I'd never even thought of. And it makes me think of, teachers this last spring when everyone was forced to do schooling online. There were all of these virtual field trips, that were popping up, or you could visit different museums and different locations. That is a spectacular idea.
And I would love it if somebody did that and then kept it going every year. So, I mean, even after we're out of the pandemic, you could either pay to go stand in the line or you could pay to go through it virtually. I would totally go through these things virtually because it wouldn't involve me having to give away an entire night to these because my Octobers are obviously packed. I do a lot of interviews and press things and all that every year. So, I wish somebody would do that. I'm sure it would certainly make the actors more comfortable, the monsters within the mazes and so forth, to know that they didn't have to come face to face with someone who is screaming through a mask. I mean, that is obviously a far too risky situation. And so I don't know. I think it seems like most of them are just going to shut down this year, but maybe somebody will come up with the idea of a virtual walkthrough.
But you're right. If you were an actor in one of those spaces, you could just have a really good, awesome one performance. And
right. Yeah.
You wouldn't have to scream at people 87 times a night.
Yeah. And with the 3D walkthrough cameras now, it could even be the kind of thing where you could stop and look around and look at the set and the monsters and all that. And so I don't know, we'll see.
And the inspiration it would give for other future haunt industry people, because they're, if you don't travel regularly, you don't get around to all the different regions with their, haunts.
Right. Well, every year I actually do cruise YouTube for like one night in every October and just try to look at all the footage people have posted of all the different haunts all over the country. I at least I get a little taste of them that way. So, yeah, I try to stay up to date on my haunts.
Well, I hope you get your wish, and we'll stay tuned to that. I agree. That would be really Cool. What was your favorite Halloween candy growing up?
Favorite candy growing up? Probably Butterfingers, the little fun-sized Butterfingers.
I do remember getting a lot of Butterfingers, and I did like those, but for me it was anything chocolate and peanut butter mixed, like
Oh yeah.
Reese's peanut butter cups or something. Cool.
Have you seen Hershey's announcement for this year's Franken Cup?
Yes, I have. I can't wait. Usually Walgreens is the place I go for all those little guilty pleasures. I'm sure they're out already. I need to go check it out.
I've actually looked in one or two drugstores already and haven't found any of they announced 4 this year, 4 bizarre candies. And so far I haven't seen them anywhere, but I haven't looked extensively either.
Yeah. As a professional fat man, I will do the research on the candy. Trust me. Do you remember Halloween candy that you hated? Like I remember going and getting the popcorn ball from usually an older person's home, or like getting an apple or something like that, and thinking, what are you talking about giving me a popcorn ball?
I don't recall ever getting any of that kind of stuff here. Maybe that's a coastal difference or something. Yeah. We always gotten pretty much nothing but wrapped candies, but there were always those things that you would wait to eat until everything else had already been eaten. Like, the Necco wafers usually came at the end for me.
What can you tell us about the misconceptions of Halloween? I know that there are like some myths that have gone on for a while, and things spread about the evils of Halloween and stuff like that. What are some of the misconceptions?
Well, that's something I love to talk about, because I often call it the most misunderstood of holidays. And right off the bat, of course, is the name, which most people have no idea where that name comes from. And it has that sort of strange sound to it. And they don't realize it's just a contraction of All Hallows Even, which dates back to the Catholic origin of the holiday. But one of my favorite misconceptions is this idea that it stems from this ancient Celtic lord of death called Samhain, although often pronounced Samhain, since that's how it's spelled. And when I sat down to write my book Trick or Treat, even though I had already written the encyclopedia, I became really interested in where did this come from? Because this didn't exist prior to a certain point in Halloween history. And I tracked down a very specific historic moment for that. You can actually date that to a specific event in history. And in the 18th century, there was a British surveyor named Charles Vallancey. And this fellow was sent by the Queen to go over and make maps of Ireland. And he ended up spending, I think it was 12 years in Ireland. And while he was there, he became obsessed with the ancient Celtic lore and legends. And he started gathering all kinds of information on this. And he eventually ended up putting out a 6-volume collection of his Celtic lore. But there was just one big problem with this, which is that Vallancey was frankly kind of an idiot. He was vastly denounced by every other historian of the day, and he would just arbitrarily decide that things were not what, in fact, everyone knew they were. And he was writing around 1785, and at that point, there had already been considerable study of the Celtic, the old languages and so forth, and everyone knew that Samhain translated literally to summer's end, and that it had been the Celtic New Year's celebration. It was celebrated on October 31st. It was a time when they brought their herds in from the fields, and they would slaughter the cattle and salt the beef and so forth and put it away for the winter. They were preparing for the winter. And it was because it was a New Year's thing for them. It was the night that they believed that the veil between the worlds was at its thinnest. And that was the night that the evil She, which is spelled S-I-D-H, or the fairies, could cross over. So Vallancey, for some bizarre reason, just decides that this is not what Samhain actually means. And he was obsessed with looking for language links. And he finds an Indian deity named Saman, Saman or something. And so he decides that the Celtic word actually refers to a deity, and he ends up going through this incredibly convoluted logic in which he ends up deciding it was a lord of death. Every single historian at the time completely denounced him, and yet those 6 volumes of Celtic lore found their way into libraries all over the world and formed what I think of as the bizarre alternate history of Halloween. And then in the mid-20th century, there's a book called Halloween Through 20 Centuries that is by a couple named Ralph and Adele Linton, and they actually just completely fixated on that misconception. Their book ends up concluding that Halloween is, how did they put it? The most degenerate of holidays. And unfortunately, there again, we get a book that was completely wrong, but was put into libraries all over the world. So we get again that misconception that it's somehow related to this worship of a lord of death. And that is completely wrong. The Celts did not worship a lord of death and sacrifice to him on Samhain. So
is that what a lot of churches and organized religion has grabbed onto? Are they still holding on to that then?
Absolutely right. Especially that Ralph and Adele Linton book. Because that was put out in the mid 20th century, that book is still very easy to find in a lot of these libraries. And there was no real good history of Halloween after that book for about 40 years. And then in the 90s, we get Leslie Bannatyne coming along with Halloween, An American Holiday, her really influential and excellent history book that corrects some of that. But there was that 40-year space where that was the standard go-to history book for Halloween. And that, I think, absolutely is what created this notion that it is somehow a satanic holiday. And it particularly ironic, of course, considering that it was originally a combination of both the Celtic and the Catholic holiday, All Saints' Day.
Yeah, that is so interesting. And you brought up Leslie Bannatyne, and I remember one of the biggest mind-blowing things, just a child of the 80s growing up, I remember hearing about the razors and the apples and how you had to be so careful. And I remember there are those retro Halloween safety videos, which are hilarious from the late 70s, early 80s. And they place so much emphasis on do not eat the candy. If it's not this, throw it away. And I even remember getting a flyer when I was in elementary school talking about how the hospital was volunteering to x-ray your candy before you felt so you could safely dig into your candy. And I remember Leslie saying none of that happened. That was not a thing. And that blew my mind, how something like that could just affect a whole country. And just this fear was so huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And the cases of that existed were all very specific and it was not this idea of the anonymous psycho that was pushed in all of those fearful videos and ads and so forth. It started with a woman, I think her name was Helen File, and she lived back east somewhere, and it was like 1961 or 2. And she was irritated with all the older kids who were out trick-or-treating. And so she started putting things like ant buttons in their pails. And that somehow ended up morphing into the whole razor blade and the apple thing, blah, 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 anonymous psychos. And then later on, we get the idea of the poisoned candy. And again, that came from a very specific case of a guy who tried to poison his own son for insurance purposes. And this was a famous case in the 70s. I think he was called the Candy Man because he put strychnine in the pixie sticks. But there really were no cases of anonymous psychos doing this. And there may have been within the last few years. I didn't end up following through enough on those to see if there was any outcome on that. But it just really doesn't happen. And it is one of those things that became this urban legend that got passed around. And the hospitals x-raying your candy. I always thought, I don't know if I want radiation passing through my candy. I think it might have been safer before that. So
It's funny because I hadn't even thought about that. You and your book, Calling the Spirits, introduced me just recently to an old film called The Phantom Carriage from 1921, which actually, the theme of that is more about New Year's Eve than it is Halloween, but it's very spooky for the time. And I've now added that to I have a list of traditional movies that I like to watch around the fall and Halloween. And I just loved that film, and I found it on YouTube. Now you live and work around Hollywood. And so I thought for sure that you probably have some favorite spooky movies that you like to watch around this time.
I do. I'm a humongous fan of the Carpenter original Halloween. I love it. I saw it when I was very young. I saw it in the theaters when it opened, and it scared the crap out of me, and I just loved it. So that's one I will watch whenever, like if I'm flipping channels and it comes on or something, I'll watch that. Of course, I love Michael Dougherty's Trick or Treat from a couple of years ago. That's a lovely new addition to the whole canon of the holiday films.
I don't think I've seen that one.
With Sam, the little character, and the canvas mask. It's an anthology film, but the stories all kind of tie together. If you haven't seen it, it's really good. He's a really wonderful filmmaker.
I will do that.
And shameless self-promotion, I actually am interviewed on the Blu-ray supplements for that.
Oh my gosh, cool.
Yeah, so I have a tie into that, but it's a really, really cool movie that, yeah, if you're a Halloween fan, you definitely need to see that one.
Yeah, and I do love, I guess when I was younger, I used to get into the slashers more than I do now. I care less about them now, but the exception to that is the Halloween films for sure.
Yeah.
And even though it is made fun of often, my favorite is Halloween H2O. Do you know that one?
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
I love that one. And to me, that's, I like that one, and I like the original, obviously, but sometimes I watch it yearly.
And I also have a fondness for 3, which is another one that people make fun of because it has virtually nothing to do with Michael Myers. And, but I think it's a crazy, I mean, it mixes in Samhain and although they mispronounce it, I think. And the whole thing with the mask and I love that. I think that's just a crazy fun movie. So
I think for me, I have a lot of movies from the time period of me being in college that are just nostalgic for me. And Halloween H2O is one of those, when you're sitting in your apartment in college and I had cable for the first time in college. And so, they'd play some of those movies every time they came out over and over, and I would watch them over and over every time they were on. And who doesn't want to, be cool and in college again? I don't know. Maybe not. Do you have some favorite music that you like around this time?
I love, I don't know if you are familiar with a group called Midnight Syndicate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Midnight Syndicate. Now, gosh, I would love to go see one of their live performances some year. Obviously, they're not doing them this year, but their stuff is great. I have a bunch of their CDs. I also love to listen to their music while I write because it's instrumental and it's moody and it puts you in the right frame of mind for creating spooky things. And I'm also a big soundtrack buff. So there are a lot of soundtracks that I love to listen to. I love the Tangerine Dream score for Near Dark, which is like my favorite movie of the entire decade of the 80s anyways. I love that one. And I love a lot of the Danny Elfman stuff. Like his score for Nightbreed is incredible. And
I'm a big film score person too. And when you were talking about Midnight Syndicate, I used to always put a Midnight Syndicate CD in my car around Halloween and play it everywhere I would go. And people thought that was the weirdest thing in the world.
Oh, I think that's awesome. I'm going to do that this year.
Driving around bumping to some spooky Midnight Syndicate. There's a man in the UK. He goes by Sam Hain. And he does kind of that kind of thing. and every year puts out a Halloween album. And he in the past has offered to allow me to play any of his stuff on the podcast. And so I might even throw some of that in here if I can contact him. But he has some good stuff too.
Oh, I will have to check him out. I didn't know about him, despite the fact that name thing is a pet peeve of mine.
Yeah, I bet it is.
If you read a lot of Halloween fiction, which I do, you see so many authors who think they're being incredibly clever by naming their character Sam Hain. And it's like, no, that was not clever 40 times ago when other people used it. It's sure not clever now that you're number 41. So.
And it, makes people think that's really how you say it.
Right, yeah.
Because there was a time period I said it that way too, until you learned that you're a giant dork and you've been saying it wrong.
Right, of course.
Have you ever bobbed for apples?
Yes. In fact, I have a photo of myself at about the age of 6 doing it.
Oh my gosh, you have to share that photo with me.
I'll see if I can find it. It's like I'm 6 years old and, I'm in my little frilly dress and there's the big steel tub set out with the water and the apples and so forth. I think in the photo, I'm not actually in the process of bobbing, but I'm like next in line or something.
That tradition cracks me up because even though to my knowledge, I've never been at like a party or any situation where they were bobbing for apples, but just that whole concept of, and I'm a germaphobe and kind of an OCD freak. It's like, ew, why would I want to dip my mouth and my teeth into something that somebody else has also dipped their mouth and and I just picture, apples with all these teeth marks and from different kids' mouths. That's so funny.
Well, I think if you actually managed to get one into your mouth, of course, you kept that and you ate it. But yeah, it probably is not the most, there probably is a reason we don't see much of it anymore. Although my favorite scary ass thing that kids used to play on Halloween, which, you read the descriptions of now and you're like, these people were insane to let kids play this game, was a game called Snapdragon.
Oh.
And Snapdragon was a thing where they would take a big, I think they always said it had to be silver, a big silver dish, and they would put nuts and raisins and little fruits and things in it, and then pour alcohol over it and light it on fire. And the kids had to reach in and snatch things out of that.
I have heard of Snapdragon, and I never knew that's really what it was.
Yeah. If anyone ever asks you if you want to play, say no.
That is insane. I'm sure these came out of the Victorian parties from the time. Is that where most of this came from? What are there some other they had a lot of divination, things they would do around Halloween. Are there other interesting ones that fascinate you?
Oh yeah, it's really interesting that those parties and those divinations and so forth were kind of how the holiday spread to America. It was the mid-19th century. A lot of people had come over from Scotland and Ireland because of the famine there in the mid-19th century and had resettled in America, and they brought this with them. But it was still kind of confined to those cultures until printing technologies made magazines popular. And the sort of middle class and upper class matrons of the time loved these magazines. And the magazines were full of these sort of quaint regional celebrations. Here's what you can do for your party this October, that kind of thing. And they fell in love with the Halloween parties. And by the time you get into like the 1860s, 70s, 80s, you can pick up these magazines and see that they're full of not only descriptions of these parties and how to host one yourself, but they're also now full of fiction about these parties because they had become so popular. Yeah, these parties would sometimes be held for children. Sometimes later on, more towards the end of the century, they became more popular with adults, I think. But they would consist of things like bobbing for apples, or Snapdragon kind of came later. Taffy pulling was big. And then they would, in the evening, play these little divination games, some of which were also like Are you crazy? That sounds incredibly dangerous. There was one in which you were supposed to go down a staircase backwards, looking into a mirror. And the idea was that at the bottom of this staircase, if you were looking into the mirror, you would see the face of the person you were going to end up marrying.
Not creepy at all. Not at all.
Yeah, right. No, they were mildly creepy, many of them. And many of them, some of them actually, you had to call on the devil to help you determine who you were going to marry. And that especially was more in Scotland, the more traditional Scottish things. Like we get that wonderful Robert Burns poem, which describes what a Scottish celebration was like in the 18th century. And the poem is just called Halloween. And it talks at length about all the things that and they were like people, young adults, and they were playing all these games to try and figure out who they were going to marry. And some of them were involved things like sowing certain seeds out at night under the moonlight and calling on the name of the devil. And the devil would tell you who you were going to marry and if you had sown the seeds properly. And yeah, there were some crazy things that they played at these.
And it used to crack me up, the single young woman would put like her blouse. She would hang her blouse up or something, and something with the sleeve. She'd wake up and the sleeve would have to be turned or something like that. And
there was a crazy one involving like a wet blouse. You had to dip it, I think, in the water where 3 streams met or something, and then you would take it home and you would hang it on the end of your bed, and it had to be positioned a certain way and so forth. Yeah, they had some pretty intense ways of doing this stuff. And then there were the dumb cake was interesting. The dumb cake was an idea where a number of young ladies would get together and they would make these very simple little cakes out of just flour, water, and egg. And then supposedly while these simple little cakes were baking, and you had to do all this without saying a word, which is why it's called the dumb cake. And while the cakes were baking, they would sit around a table in the kitchen, and they could not be allowed to speak. And supposedly they would see their future beloved come in and take their cake. Now, of course, this was a case where many young men would decide that was the moment to come in and make sure that their gal knew that they were into it too and show up for real and take the cake. But the dumb supper or dumb cakes were an interesting ritual too.
Again, nothing creepy there.
Yeah, right.
Speaking of the anonymous psycho, see who's just gonna walk in your kitchen and steal the cake.
Well, and there were also some really funny cases of people being pranked while they were playing these games. There was one that involved throwing a length of yarn into this thing called the lime kiln, which was like this big thing where they would bake the lime, and it was very deep and so forth. And you would throw this length of yarn in, and you'd be holding on the other end, and you were supposed to say something about, in the name of the devil, if my beloved is here, tug the yarn and tell me his name, or something like that. And of course, there would always be the guy hiding in the lime kiln who would freak people out, who would suddenly say, it's the devil, and people would scream and run.
Or give the name of the creepiest guy in town or something like that.
Oh, that's good. I never heard that one, but I'll bet it was done a few times.
I bet. I want to let people know that just because I've read it and I know it's fabulous, that your book, and you mentioned it earlier, Trick or Treat, A History of Halloween, is out there, and it is fabulous. And so check that out. And then I want to let you have the chance to tell people where to find you and what's coming up, maybe Halloween related for you.
Yeah, I can be found at my website, lisamorton.com, which has links to my newsletter. I do a monthly newsletter that has all kinds of stuff that I'm working on in it, and little articles and so forth, and a giveaway. I'm also on Facebook talking a lot about the things I'm working on, and there's a link to my Facebook through my website. And I'm really excited because I have a book coming out this Tuesday. It's an anthology I co-edited with a gentleman named Leslie Klinger. It's called Weird Women, Classic Supernatural Fiction from Groundbreaking Female Writers, 1852 to 1923. It's a collection in which we set out to prove that there were lots of early women writing some really scary horror. We found some incredible stories for this. It just got a starred review and book list, which I'm really proud of and happy about. And then in September, we'll have Calling the Spirits, A History of Seances, and I'll also have a collection out of my own short fiction coming in September.
Awesome. Well, we look forward to that. And I want to thank you for hanging out with me and nerding out on Halloween. It's been a while since I've had an episode where we just sit down and nerd out.
Oh, I can do that anytime.
I bet you can. I hope you never tire of it.
By the way, I will be appearing on a new I think it's the Travel Channel documentary on Halloween this year.
Okay. Do you know what it's called?
I'm not sure what it's called. I taped it in March, and it was weird timing because I taped it like the day before the lockdown orders in LA. And so it was a really strange situation anyways. And it was we also had torrential rains that day. So it's like, I think I've blanked parts of it out of my memory. But it should be airing on the Travel Channel this October.
Well, thanks for being with me again. You rock.
Hey, thanks, Patrick. This is fun.
Hey, this is Patrick breaking in really quickly to let you know that we still don't know exactly when the program that Lisa was talking about on the Travel Channel will be airing and what it's called. So stay tuned for that, and I'll probably mention it in the Parlor and on Facebook once I learn more about that. Thank you to the following super Paranerds who support the show at patreon.com/Big Seance. Stephanie Moss, James Deacon, Melissa Armour, Anne Marie Sullivan, Justin J. Justin, Genesis, Natalie, Kim Robb, Jim Budd, Josiel Lorenzo, Susan Davey, Paula Mitchell, and Amy Park Gedicke. My supporters at the Parlor guest level, who can be found at bigseance.com/Parlor guests, are Linda of shimmeringmoons.com, Denise Sia of Mystic Moms Paranormal, Anne Rekovich of ozparatech.com, Gretchen of Adirondack Aromatherapy, Mindy Kentop, Hope Battaglia, Cassie Keller, Glenna Becker, Diane Rax, Nettie, Dina DeCastro of Dina DeCastro Astrology, Peggy Hagen, Marion Hover Clairvoyant, Bruce Williams, Lana and John of Carbon Lilies, David Rubenstein, and Norman and Linda Keller. That sound you just heard was the above and beyond. There's not even a category for your level of support fireworks display, because I have 4 really awesome listeners who support the show at the $10 level. Steve Skinner, Kevin Gilbert, AJ Meredith, and James Wilfong. So thank you, Steve, Kevin, AJ, and James. And thank you, Paranerds. Oh, and happy Halloween.
For show notes, including links to anything we may have mentioned in this episode, visit bigseance.com. You can find and subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and just about anywhere podcasts are found. Do you have any comments or feedback? Go to bigseance.com/feedback to learn how to get your voice in a future show. Or you can call my feedback line, 7755-TELL-ME. That's 775-583-5563. Interested in learning how to promote and share the podcast? Go to bigseance.com/share. Thank you so much for listening. Unfortunately, it's time to blow the candles out, but we'll see you and light them again next time.
listeners of the Big Seance podcast. Oh, boy.